While the core of this tutorial is more about mastering than it is about T-Racks, we're just going to do a little rundown on the basics of T-Racks for those who aren't familiar. This won't be a proper substitute for not reading the manual, and I won't cover every little intricacy that's in here, but for the basics it will get you started. When you open T-Racks, unless you're opening a saved document, you initially get this empty frame, and from there you need to import the audio you intend to work on, and there's two ways to do that. The first is using this load button down here to bring up the standard load save dialog and import this way. So I can just click here, and there's a tune, double click on that, and it's straight in. Alternatively, I can remove from there using the same trick. So click on the audio you wish to remove and click the remove button. You'll get a dialog asking you to confirm, and we say yes, we want to remove that. The other way to import is to drag files straight into T-Racks from your desktop. So I'll switch over. There's my desktop there, and I'll say grab this track and drop it into the list, and there we go. Drop another one into the list, and so on. But what's even better about this is you don't actually have to drop it over the list. Anywhere in the entire T-Racks GUI is fine. So I'll grab this top one and I'll let go over here, straight into the list. Grab this one down here and go right to the top of T-Racks, drop it there, straight into the list. So fantastic, you don't have to be super accurate, just drag it over the GUI and you'll be fine. Now you can't reorder the tracks once they're in this list, but really there's no need to. This has nothing to do with the order that your CD will run, and every file is separate in T-Racks and can each run its own chain of effects. So the order of this list is largely irrelevant. You can jump from 1 to 4 to 3 as you're playing, so it simply doesn't matter. Now once a file's in T-Racks, you can adjust in and out points for the file and in and out fades. So let's say we were trimming up this song, we can zoom in, and we can grab this little arrow here and we can see there's a bit of dead space before the actual start of the track. Fine, we'll grab that and we'll make the in point right there. We can zoom right in even more and get very close. And from here we could, if we chose to, grab the fade and let's say set a fade. So have a quick listen to this before the fade. Okay, so a little sort of sound leading into it. I can actually create a fade that finishes right at the point of the impact there. Okay, and vice versa at the other end. We can see there's a bit of dead space there, so we'll zoom out, back to the front, and yep, I'll have to zoom out further than that. We'll come to the end. Oh, still quite a lot. So I'll grab the out marker and keep coming, say to about there, and even there, who knows. Let's play that. So he's got quite a long fade on that track. But let's pretend we want it to get out quicker. So we'll grab that and even move the out point closer so there's less fading. Try now. There is someone just like me. And we're fading there. Okay, now here we can choose the type of fade in or fade out shape. So if I click on here, we've got a linear that it's set to now, but if I choose, I can go for a more exponential feel by clicking on that, and now it'll fade out quicker. Yep, gets softer faster, or even more so. This one will get quite soft quite quick, and then the actual soft part of the fade will take longer to go out. There, it's just about gone already. Still hanging in there just. While we're mastering, we might want to set up a loop point within the single track that might, say, be the loudest part of the song, going over and over, or a certain part we're having trouble with, or whatever. So if we switch on the loop mode from here, and I'll zoom out so we can see what's going on. Right, now we've got some yellow loop points, an in and an out at the other end, which we're a little bit too far out to see. There it is. So for instance, in this track, there's a soft section here, a loud section here. If we wanted to focus our attention on just the loud section while we're doing the core of our mastering, we can set the loop out there, the loop in there, and it will loop within that point. So even if I start near the end of the loop now, it'll loop back to the top and indefinitely loop within those 2 points. As you can see, and then it will just keep going until we hit stop or start our loop again. Now to the core of T-Racks, which of course is its processors, they're very simple to operate. You've got 12 slots here. You can see the first 4 are labelled A and B, 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, so that creates 8. So they're what's called in parallel, A's and B's, and then following those we've got 4 more points in series. So if I click the Show Chain button here, you'll get a little dialog of what's actually going on. So there's 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, and so on. And once we get to 3, then to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 appear in series after that. And to insert a plugin is as simple as just clicking on one of these down arrows here. In this case, I'm on A. If I wanted to talk to B, I would click on that one and then I'd be programming B. But let's go back to 1A, click on here and choose the processor of your choice. So let's say linear phase EQ, and up it comes. Now, if we look at our show chain, we can see that in that first slot, there's a linear phase EQ. To remove it, simply go here and either say empty or switch it to another one. So let's say we don't want linear phase EQ, we really want classic equalizer. That just switches it over, and this little graphic here just implies the look of the plugin, so you know which one you've got. Or to get rid of it altogether, empty. Now understand that in T-Rex, as I mentioned, each track down here has its own chain of plugins. So at the moment we're on the track You Knew Me, and I might say a classic compressor can go there, and in this slot here we'll go classic multiband limiter, and at the end here we'll put a brick wall limiter. Now, as soon as I click to another track, say Heart and Soul number 2, they're all gone. It's a completely independent thing. And this is the way you can master with T-Rex and have so much power and flexibility. So this one, I'll go brick wall limiter there, which makes absolutely no sense, but I'm just being random at the moment. So I'm just dropping some plugins in. Right, now as we can see, I can click between here, and those two tracks are totally independent of each other with completely independent processing chains. A great feature up here is the compare function, which allows us to volume match the dry sound with our process sound that we're working on. Because in mastering, as we're pumping things up, things get louder and louder. When we want to compare with what we started with, it's generally much, much softer. And our brains are often tricked into thinking that whatever's louder is better. This function allows us to pump up the level of the original sound, so it more approximates the level we're achieving with our mastered sound. Hence, we can make a more informed decision as to whether we're actually improving things or just making them louder. Now down here we've got a fantastic metering section in T-Rex. I'll get some volumes happening so we can see. So we've got peak meters here, we've got an RMS meter down here, we've got an excellent new perceived loudness meter here, which we will talk about in a little bit better detail soon. Over here is a phase scope, correlation meter just to make sure we've got things happening in positive phase, and a spectrum analyzer over here. And under this settings tab, very fine controls for all of these. The loudness suggestion of the loudness meter, and various settings for the analyzer, phase meter and peak meters. Under the file menu, which is just above your field of vision here, but that's the file menu, trust me, we've got the project properties option. This is where we set what we want to output at the end of our exercise. So in our case, we're set to a 16-bit WAV file. If we were going to make a 16-bit WAV file, we will want dithering on, and we'll discuss more about dithering in a later tutorial. We have various choices, including the standard popular audio file formats, such as WAV, AIF, Sound Designer 2, and so on. Now here under the Preferences tab, we can choose T-Rex's quality versus CPU power trade-offs, and also latency issues. Now in a straight mastering situation, latency is not usually a problem, so we don't necessarily want the lowest latency, we arguably want the highest latency if it gives us a much better quality product. So we would choose lowest latency off in this case. We'll take oversampling and linear phase on to get the highest quality results. And these other options you can learn more about from the manual. Now let's say we've finished our mastering project and we want to output our results. We can go over here to the Process button. Now this is set to what we chose in our project properties dialog, which we left as WAV. I turned dithering on, it's 44.1 16-bit. So at this point we can output either the current file, so it's Heart and Soul because that's the one that's highlighted here, or we can just say everything, I've worked on every single track, I want to output every single one. So we just need to choose an output path for our finished tracks. It's going to append the file name _T-Rex so we don't confuse them with the original file, so heartandsoul.wav will turn into heartandsoul _T-Rex.wav, and all the files will end up in the directory that we choose here. And that's pretty much the fast view of most of the things in T-Rex. And I'll see you in the next tutorial as we start getting into things. Hi there and welcome to Mastering with T-Rex. Presumably if you've bought this tutorial, you have at least a very simple idea of what the mastering process is. For those that don't, put simply, it's the last creative step in the process of making a record. A chance to homogenize all those songs that were mixed days or weeks apart, possibly with different approaches and maybe even with different personnel or in different studios. It's a chance to stop looking at the trees and start looking at the forest. In a perfect world where money is no object, after slaving away for weeks or months on a record, you would take it to a professional mastering facility who does nothing but mastering day in, day out, and allow their superior equipment, room and fresh ears to bring a much needed alternate perspective to your project. But that's in a perfect world. I'm guessing if you're watching this, you're looking for some tips to improve your own mastering, possibly mastering of your own work. Hey, there's no reason you can't make reasonable gains in mastering your own work, but you need to be aware of a few points. The best tools are great ears, a great room, and great monitors. Arguably in that order, but really in any order of importance. Ears, room, monitors. For a start, it's obvious that if your room is masking some frequencies or boosting others, you're never going to get to hear things how they're supposed to be. We can't all have perfect, flat and balanced rooms. In fact, very few people do. So do what you can do to minimise a bumpy response, and then possibly use other means like multiple sets of monitors to check things on, and even high-quality headphones as an additional reference. And listen to lots of great commercial releases, old and new, in your room, on your system. I always know something's wrong when I put on my favourite old CDs in some places and they just don't sound right. If the spectral balance on that CD is something I know and love, then that's the sound I'm striving for. If it doesn't sound how you expect before you start, then you're always going to be working against yourself. Now, just a few broad observations about mastering before we get into the detail. Firstly, if you're a musician or mixer looking at getting into mastering at a beginner's level, understand that a little goes a long way compared to mixing. I'm talking in terms of EQ and compression. In mixing, because you're dealing with individual elements, you can sometimes be very heavy-handed with EQ boosts and cuts or compressing things very hard, knowing that the dynamics of the song are being represented elsewhere in the arrangement. In mastering, EQ boosts and cuts are generally smallish. Obviously there are exceptions if you're repairing major problems, but generally you should be thinking in gentle, broad brushstrokes. Secondly, everything you do in mastering affects something else. Unlike mixing where you can deal with that pesky guitar honk, trying to do that in mastering might take some of the body out of the lead vocal, for instance. I always get clients asking me to do something to alter their snare or vocal or bass, and we all have to understand that while a positive outcome might be possible, there will always be a repercussion. Thirdly, while mastering can do some small miracles, you can't save a really bad mix because you can't control balances in any detail. Certain moves you make can change the perception of subtle balances, but if the bass guitar is way too soft or the vocal way too hot in a mix, there's little you can do. If a remix is possible, then that's always the best bet, though obviously this isn't always possible. Another point, it's not always necessarily about purity and accuracy. It's often very much about attitude and distortion and non-linearities, just like mixing. Certain pieces of gear are lauded for things that on a test bench may not be perfect, but they are what's often called musical. T-Rax is cool like this because it's got elements like the new linear phase EQ and the opto compressor, which are very respectful of the source material. You can make very transparent changes that retain the character of the original material. And to contrast with that, the new vintage tube compressor and tube program EQ and T-Rax are modelled to have the attitude of the original hardware pieces, a very musical and flattering sound that seems to make things just sound better. They even have a sound about them at their flat setting. Which approach you take, transparent or coloured, depends on what sort of material you're mastering and what sort of results you're chasing. Now next up, we'll have a bit of a chat about loudness and start playing with T-Rax. Now before we get into any heavy mastering, let's talk about the loudness wars. You're in the wrong business if you haven't noticed what's happened to the sound of CDs in the last 10 to 12 years. Put simply, it's gone nuts with respect to how loud and awful some albums sound. The end result is fatiguing to listen to, and really, there are no winners here because the mastering engineers don't want to do this to the level that it's got to. The circuits that the radio stations have even out everything anyway, and now an ugly precedent has been set that the next bunch of mastering engineers have to try to aspire to. This dynamic killing is often referred to as hypercompression. It started in the mid to late 90s when digital limiters both in software and hardware first rose to prominence. These limiters were great because they gave you a hard brick-walled ceiling that you could work with. So now you could bring the overall level up and have the odd peaks chopped off by the limiter with virtually no audible side effects. That was fine until people started pushing them harder and harder. Then new models came out that had smarter algorithms with clever automatic release detection systems in them to push things even harder. Then limiters alone weren't enough, so we got into devices that mess with the harmonics to make mixes sound more dense and therefore increase their perceived loudness, and As well as this, many of the top mastering engineers in the world intentionally started clipping the input stages of some of their analog equipment, and because of the quality of these bits of gear, the sound of this clipping isn't as unpleasant as you might think and provides yet another layer of hedge trimming on the way to making the master as hot as possible. Now, I'll be honest with you, sometimes clients come in and they bring a CD of their favourite artist and they want you to match the loudness. Even if the CD they bring in is not squeezed to absolute death, generally it's a major record by an established artist where the mixes themselves are just vastly better than what they've brought to you. There's no way you can match that perceived volume without causing ugly sound effects. And that's because of the weird irony here: the better the mix, the more resistant to hypercompression it is. But that doesn't always make it a good thing, and of course good taste should dictate the limits. I suppose the approach you need to take here is to make the mix as loud as that mix will tolerate. And of course this is dictated by you and your client. I've had clients sitting over my shoulder directing me to keep going, when clearly the negative artifacts are creeping in. Now, a certain amount of kind of good distortion is typical in much of today's pop, rock, R&B and hip-hop, and it does serve to give the music a certain toughness, but like anything, it's all a matter of being judicious and using taste. So let's dive into T-Rax here and have a listen to some of the things we can do with this new brick wall limiter that's included in T-Rax 3, and we'll try some other approaches to see if we can get some loudness out of this particular track. Now, a good friend of mine, Graham Goble, the ex-main songwriter and backing singer in Little River Band, has been kind enough to lend me the pre-masters to his most recent album, and so this is providing great fodder for us to manipulate. Now, this is a well-recorded rock record. In many ways, it's a lot better than some of the things you get from your average client, but let's work with this and see what we can do. So I'll just play a little section here so you can hear what we're dealing with. I'll just move this input back to 0, so we're starting with a clean slate. Okay, so a bit of a chorus there. I'll just back off a little bit, start a bit earlier. Okay, that's the right spot. Now, I'll start pushing up the input to just this limiter. Now, this is the limiter with its style in clean mode. What's clever about this limiter is that there's lots of choices of styles, so we can go from a completely transparent style limiting to what it's got now, but because it's transparent, it's not going to tolerate much. And then we can get into these other versions here, which are more designed to be pushed harder and can compensate accordingly. So they've got these advanced settings, getting into hard clipping and various saturation modes and so on. We'll go back to the original one, which is clean, and we'll start pushing it up and let's watch what happens. Okay, we're almost got peaks at 0. Right, we have. And you can see here on the left, we're starting to have small amounts of gain reduction. So at this point, we're pretty transparent. Yep, so at that point we're pretty transparent. Now back in the early days of these limiters that I was mentioning in the mid to late 90s, that's as far as you would push things generally. You'd push it so you'd get a tiny bit of gain reduction. You've managed to, in this case, I've pushed the whole track's average level up 3.5 dB. That's a great advantage normally. And away we go, we're happy. But as things started getting more and more aggressive, people started pushing it harder and harder and harder. So at this level, we're fine. But have a look down here on this meter called perceived loudness. Now, T-Rax has got this great new meter that isn't showing you peak like this one is. It isn't showing you RMS like this one is. It's showing you a perception of loudness. And of course, whose perception is it? Well, you can set that in these settings here. And you can say loudness suggestion. Now, at the moment, the suggestion for this is pop rock, which is probably the most typical one you're going to get. But maybe jazz would be much softer and things like that. You can choose a different style. But let's go for pop rock because that's what we're dealing with here. Now, what this meter is telling us is that the average current sort of record on the radio sits in this green area. Red's probably getting a little bit too hot, but green's where you should be aiming for. And yet, I've got this track here, which is peaking at 0. I'm getting gain reduction on the limiter here, and yet look how far off I am from the green. I'm miles away. So in spite of the fact that I've got a well-mixed song here, I've pushed it up so I'm hitting the ceiling, it's still way too soft, quote unquote, to satisfy the minds of most of the clients that we're going to get these days. So now let the destruction begin. We need to find some ways of getting this louder and still maintaining as much of the clarity of the track as we can, and yet get it into this zone so it's a bit more competitive with what's out there. So the first thing we can try is changing the style of the limiter. So let's push it up to say Advanced 4, and now various techniques by the limiter have been employed to allow us to push things harder, and it will certainly change the colour of the mix, but it won't be as blatantly pumpy. Okay, now I can go hotter before gain reduction even begins. Okay, there we go. Now I am creeping into this little green zone now, which is cool.
Whenever you're near me, I can't speak as you come closer to me.
Okay, but the truth is it's not really sounding that good, is it? I mean, it's starting to pump and you can feel that the track's starting to become compromised. So maybe there's some other ways that we can treat the audio before this. So I'll pull back a little bit now and show you another trick. I'll pull that back to, okay, 5.5 of boost. You heard me mention earlier that mastering engineers deliberately clip the signal beforehand, and that's not clip in the ugly digital distortion way, it's a different sort of clip. Well, what I'll do is I'll copy this lot of settings from A into B. Okay, but now that I'm in B, I'm going to add the classic clipper plugin in front of the brick wall limiter. Okay, so now in this B setting here, A is still intact. I'll go in, I'll drop this even more. I'll pull this back to, say, 2.5, just get it out of the way. So now we'll run the song into the soft clipper first and then feed that signal off to the brick wall limiter. So I'll give it a bit of a push here. Now if I want to make it a bit more of a tough rock song, I'll give it a nice hard slope here. So quite an aggressive clip. I'm getting a lot of gain there. I might pull the limiter back even more. Back here. Okay, let's say I'm happy with that. I'm getting 1 or 2 dB of reduction there. Back to the brick wall. Now I'll push this up to where it's just getting a bit of reduction again from here. In fact, I'm not getting any gain reduction. I can probably keep going a little. Okay. Now what we can do now is compare these two settings A to B. A, the limiter on its own, and B, the classic clipper feeding the limiter. So we'll go back to A. And straight away it feels softer, doesn't it? As soon as I click to B, I'm deep into this green zone. And it's a fair bit louder. Back to A. Back to B. Now I'm not suggesting this is an exact apples for apples comparison, but straight away you can see by treating the signal before the limiter gets it, I've got another level of control and I've made the track sound quite tough and loud without necessarily squeezing it to death. This is where T-RAC's perceived loudness meter is actually really handy, because no matter what we do, we're going to be smashing zero. I mean, we were smashing the digital ceiling before we even started turning things up properly. So in a way, a normal peak meter is not helping us at all. We're going to be belting that ceiling irrespective. An RMS meter is okay, but this perceived loudness meter is actually a really clever way for us to get into the zone, and it doesn't mean we have to get right up there to the top of the green stage, but at least we've got a way of seeing if we're in the ballpark of where commercial discs are, and it gives us a bit of a heads up as to whether we have to try something more drastic or things are going to be fine the way you're going or whatever. So it's a great way of just seeing where we stand. And keep in mind, this is before we've done any EQ or anything like that to try and level out the balance. So we'll be doing more with loudness as we go along, but there's a good start to the loudness wars, and be one of the good guys if you can. Now we're going to take our first look at EQ. If you're mastering your own work, then EQ is one of many times in the process that you need to make sure you've changed your thinking and approach, from mixing that is. EQing and mixing is not only all about bringing out the best in each instrument, but sometimes it's selectively shaping some not to be in the way of others. In mastering, EQing is all about the big picture, the big sonic picture. If you're mastering other people's work, often you'll hear balance issues in the mix that may not be to your taste, but you've just got to step back and hear the mix as a single sound in a way, and ask yourself what it needs as a whole. As we've said, you can sometimes make moves that will subtly massage some balance issues, but again, be aware that every move like that has a consequence. More than anything else, EQing in mastering is about the whole tonal balance. You're trying to create a master that has the right balance between bottom, middle and top, just to break it into three. What this balance exactly is depends on your perception, perhaps based on some of your favourite albums or maybe whatever's doing well in the current market. Your ability to create this balance depends highly on your perception skills, but also, as mentioned in the first movie, the quality of your room and monitoring. Now, to boost or cut. When you hear a perceived problem, sometimes reversing your gut feeling might give a better result. Let's say a track sounds a little dull or muffled. I know my first reaction is often to push a broad Q boost somewhere between 4 to 6k. Now, while this may be exactly what's needed, sometimes this perception of a muffled sound might be because there's a low-mid build-up. Perhaps a cut around 2 to 400 Hz might have the same effect. By moving that cloud out of the way, things just feel brighter. And as a bonus, it comes without any added harshness that might be caused by boosting high mids. Next up, a very commonly asked question about parametric EQs in both mixing and mastering: how wide should the Q be? As I'm sure most of you know, the Q is the width of the filter in a parametric equalizer. So just looking at this one on screen now, we can make a boost here. And the Q, which is this control here, is the width of the bell. So that's very narrow and that's very wide. So a general answer here is the wider the Q, the more smooth the EQ will sound, but of course the more far-reaching the EQ is. The more narrow the Q, the more surgical it is, and the less intrusive it is on neighbouring frequencies, but boosts might ring and cuts might leave an audible hole. So let's do some EQing here, keeping in mind that the data compression you're hearing on this audio track will change things, and compared to many jobs that come to me, this one here is remarkably good. So in this case, my job is to enhance this mix rather than repair it, as I often have to do. I'll set this back to 0. I'll switch over here to the linear phase EQ and play this track. Now, of course, this is completely unmastered, and at the moment my feeling about this is it's a little bit dull. It could certainly be a little bit brighter compared to what's out there today. If I listen to the low mids to see if maybe a cut there will give the illusion, it does actually seem quite articulate down there, so it's not a particularly cloudy mix. It's been well mixed, as I said, so perhaps boosting in this case is the answer. Let's have another listen. Yeah, the bass is sounding pretty good. We can hear what's going on down there. If I was to make a cut around 250, it does tend to thin it out a little bit if I do that. I could maybe take a slight cut. Let's just say take a dB out there at around 250. And now I'll need to make a little boost to get that kind of high mid speak that I'm chasing. So 3.2 is a little high, a little low, sorry. Maybe try around here and we'll search around a bit. Now I'll overdo it a little bit, the old trick of I'll push it too far to find the spot I'm looking for. And now scan. So it's a bit harsh there. Maybe around there, 5 and a bit. Now pull it back. I'll jump to the end of the song where the choruses are more full on. Now bypass. Now because we've attuned our ears to hearing a bit more high mids, it sounds even duller than it did before when we bypass. Which is probably something we need to talk about as well. Your ear gets tricked very easily, and often if you're putting high end into things, when you switch off after that, things sound even duller than they were in the past, and you become more and more accustomed to that. Knowing that in advance can save you from pouring more and more top end into things and then really overcooking it, which most people do seem to do when they're just starting out, myself included. That's the bypassed. That's probably a little too bright, but that's 5 dB, that's a heck of a boost, so I've gone a bit heavy there. Okay. Sometimes it can be cool to add some air right at the very, very top, but you've got to be really careful with this because it always sounds quite good at first and later you realise you've cranked it up too much. But we can set up this shelf that's there now, push it up to quite high, even 12K. So it's a very, very high shelf. And just hear the effects of that. So I'll go very hard and see. Okay, I'll try that. Now bypass. Yeah, or bypass just that shelf. Yep. I'm listening in high resolution headphones at the moment, and yeah, there's a slight boost there. I don't know if it's coming through on the data compressed audio, but that can certainly make a difference. These sorts of high shelves are usually very pleasing to the ear because they're above that sort of harsh band that the ear is very sensitive to in that, 3 to 6K area. So when you start boosting above that, it can be quite pleasing, but again, can also be quite grating over the long term. So be careful with that. Let's have a little look at the bottom end. Now the bass guitar is quite prominent, but there's not a great deal of kick in there, so perhaps we can do the same sort of thing to the low end, being very careful not to make it tubby. So, whoops, I've just changed that off a shelf, put that back, turn that on. So a low shelf to start with. Now I've got too much bass guitar boosting now. So I'll pull it lower. Okay, bypass that. I'll just bypass that one shelf. Yeah, it's made a slight benefit. I'll probably need to hear that on the large monitors to make sure I haven't cooked the very bottom too hot, but in the headphones it doesn't sound too bad at the moment. Now the trap I might have fallen into myself here is gone for the smiley face curve. I've boosted the very highs, I've boosted the very lows, and I haven't really paid much attention to what's in the middle here. We've done the high mid boost there to make it speak a bit brighter, but really we have to make sure we haven't hidden what's in the middle. So let's have another listen focusing on the middle. And perhaps we could do with a little bit of mid presence. So that's exactly where it's speaking, about there, but pull it down quite a lot, maybe only a slight boost. And notice here all these Qs are very wide, they're all 0.7s, which is a good starting spot I think in mastering, 0.7, maybe 0.8. If you want to make a very, very broad brushstroke thing, 0.5, 0.6 are good starts, and usually much tighter than that when we're going for small problem areas. So let's have a listen from the front of this song and see how it sounds.
Is your mother calling? Did you hear the warning? Are you satisfied?
I'll bypass here.
Is your mother calling?
Yeah, it's certainly more exciting with it in.
Can you sleep at night? When you shut the light, do the curtains move? Will you ever prove you could sleep at night? The boy inside wants to run away. There's no time to go out and play. He won't listen to a word you say. The boy inside.
Okay, not too bad. So that's a basic first look at EQ, and obviously we'll be discussing more about this as we move along. Now we're going to have our first look at dynamics. Now when we say dynamics, we're usually referring to compression and limiting, which are the two main tools for dealing with dynamics control, and both perform different functions and are sometimes confused by people. First of all, the term limiting here can have two meanings, I think. The traditional meaning, which still has total validity, is a compressor operating at a ratio of, say, 10:1 or greater. The more modern meaning refers to the class of digital device that perform brick wall style limiting. That is, absolutely nothing gets past the hard threshold, giving the device a virtual zero attack. Release time is generally adjustable to some degree with these modern devices though, making them useful for all sorts of chores in mixing and of course at the end of your mastering chain. Using the older definition, you could be compressing, say, at 12:1, but have a slow attack, allowing transients through, so while both are limiting technically, the end results are very different. This latter example is not a confidence device, that is, you cannot rely on it to literally limit all signal. Its use is primarily as a dynamic controlling device. I think it's safe to say that in modern mastering you must have a brick wall limiter as your last device, whether you choose to hit it hard or not. The irony here is that while brick wall limiting appears to be a much more aggressive thing to do to your audio than, say, compressing it at 2:1 or 4:1, used sparingly it's actually limiting that can give you a few extra dB of perceived volume with very little to show for it in terms of artifacts. A good way to think about it might be to use limiting to bring up apparent volume without dealing heavily with the sound of the music. Use compression when you want to actually change the density of the music, like taking a slightly anemic sounding track and adding a bit of meat or punch to it. Now, I just thought I'd run a little anecdote by you, which is something that happened to me on one of my very first high-profile label jobs that I was doing. I was working on a certain track for 10 to 15 minutes, and at the end of this time I really thought I had it smacking. You know that feeling you get when a mix or a master crosses this imaginary line in your brain and suddenly you get a good feeling about it. You think you're right on top of it now. Anyway, I was pretty proud of myself, and then the artist, who was also the producer and the mixer, came back into the room and I was all like, check this out, thinking I'm going to get all these pats on the back. And his first comment was, "Where's the snare gone?" And he was absolutely right. The brick wall limiter I was using was working a little too hard and its zero attack was eating the snare drum. So there was two things I had to learn from this. Number one is that obvious one we keep repeating. Every positive change in mastering has a consequence somewhere. In this case, the trade-off for getting the track rocking the way I had it was the damage to the snare drum. Now this may have been exacerbated by a snare that was maybe too loud in the mix in the first place, or maybe it was EQ too pointy in the mix, but either way the answer was to back off the limiting a little. The compromise sound had the benefit of keeping some of the rockin' value I had dialed in with the other toys, and also tucked the snare in just a little bit as well without completely eating it up. So in a way this is one of those examples of a subtle perceived balance change being possible in mastering. But the second thing I learned from this was that limiters still had to get better from those old days in the late 90s when I did this job. The limiters we have access to now, like the brick wall limiter here in T-Rax, which I'll insert over the end of the mix here, are light years ahead of those from 10 years ago. I can't entirely explain why the settings on this limiter won't eat the snare drum like my old one did, but we have made progress. There's now a certain amount of intelligence in these things, and they have what's known as look-ahead technology in them, so they're actually analysing the audio fractionally before we get to hear it, allowing them to make some clever decisions ahead of time. So going back to compression now, the next choice you have to make is what sort of compressor to use. I call this the need for speed. Does your track need something snappy or something more vintage? So here in T-Rax we've got the new Opto compressor, which gives us all sorts of control. That's this one. And this compressor is great. It can easily be made to bounce to the track in time and things like that. Whereas at the other extreme we've got the vintage tube compressor, which is this one here, which gives us a more sort of classic slow and cuddly sound of compression. And now I'm starting to sound like these wanky hi-fi magazines that use the most bizarre adjectives just to describe speaker cable or something, but sometimes it's very difficult to describe the audio qualities of a device without using silly words. So which to use depends on your taste and the needs of the track. Maybe you want to use both at the same time, so make sure to check out the video later in this tutorial on parallel processing. So let's just have a little listen now to these two and see what sort of differences we can quickly glean. At the moment, the 670 here, the vintage compressor, is switched off. So we'll just look at the Opto compressor. Now this is the default setting that it comes with, but I'm going to go in here to the module and dial up Deluxe, Opto Comp, and choose this preset here, 3 dB Hard Comp. Right, now this is a pretty aggressive setting, and that's why I've chosen it, to exaggerate what this compressor can do. So let's have a listen. So this is compressing at 30 to 1. I mean, we're limiting in the old sense as I described earlier. Let's just bypass and see where it is. And now we're relatively volume matched, and really we need to take a minute to talk about that. When we're going to compare anything in the dynamic world, make sure that you match your volumes when you're bypassing and unbypassing, because then you're really hearing what the device is adding and not hearing some sort of psychoacoustic effect, because 99% of the time whatever's louder we think is better. Even if it's just like half a dB louder, we often pick that one in a shootout. And that's especially the case when the sounds are quite close, when you're making very subtle moves. So if something's half a dB different, I mean, if you're smashing the hell out of something, well, sure, you're going to hear that differently every time. But when the differences are very, very subtle, half a dB, you're always going to pick the louder one. I could just about bank on it. So let's have another listen again. So having said that, this does seem louder with this compression in, so I'm going to try and match them as evenly as I can, and then we can actually listen to the sound. Right, that's pretty close. And the difference I'm hearing there is that the compressed version is more dense. It's probably a little bit more distorted because that's what's happening. Very slight distortion, but it's more dense. Now again, this becomes an artistic thing. If your goal is to get this track to eventually sound quite loud, well, little bits of density in various devices along the way is probably what you want to do. Not to be at the detriment of the audio though. So let's have a play around. At the moment we've got a 0 attack, so we're really not being very forgiving at all. Let's try and get a better sound on this compressor. So I might actually hit the compressor harder, but open the attack a bit wider. Now I've made it louder, so let's just turn the output down. Okay, let's compress a little bit harder. Okay, now while it is slightly more distorted, it is evening out a lot of the things in the mix. So little kicks and snares are not poking out as much as they were before. Let's open the attack even more. Now the bass guitar's sticking out more the wider I open this attack. That's probably too far anyway in a mastering setting. Let's turn the ratio down to something more typical. So maybe just a 2 or 3 to 1. Say 2.5. Right, so of course it's much less action now. Not too loud again. Now, as you can see, we are working quite subtly now. You're getting into very small changes, which is what mastering often is, especially if you're working on material that is quite good sounding to start with. When you're doing major repair jobs, you can do fantastic things in very short time. I mean, one huge boost of an EQ can suddenly take a track from a 3 out of a 10 to a 6 out of 10 sort of thing. But when you're working on something that might be, 7 or 8 out of 10 to start with, you're always going to be digging away at just little things, just tiny little improvements that you might be able to make. So keeping that in mind, you've really got to listen carefully when you're bypassing and not bypassing because, you're working in very small increments. So back to it. Yeah, okay, so we've actually made the track sound a little bit more dense. So depending on what sort of thing you're going for in the end, I mean, you could argue that we're actually making it a little bit more fatiguing, that sort of thing. But a lot of modern records sound like that now, so maybe that's the area we have to go in. 15 years ago, you probably wouldn't have passed this through a compressor. You might have just let it go because it's quite dynamic and that's the way records were being made then. But que sera, sera, let's move on to the Model 670 and hear the difference between that. So I'll turn this one off. I'll turn this one back on. Now the difference here is that this doesn't have nearly as many controls. As we know, it's modelling a Fairchild 670 compressor, and it has far less controls. Really all you can work with is the time constants here, which affect both attack and release time. You've got a gain control, and you've got a threshold, and finally an output. So there's not too much you can do. You can't really get it wrong except by driving things too hard, as opposed to the other compressor where there are lots of settings where things can get confusing with attacks and releases and so on. So let's run this and see how it sounds. So at the moment we're just touching it. So even at that default setting, let's bypass. Very subtle. It does sound a bit warmer and a bit more low mid. Yeah, it's a little bit thicker in the low mids just by being on, with a tiny bit of gain reduction. I mean, there's not even a dB going on there. So let's press it a little. Now at the moment we're on 5, which isn't too bad to start on actually with a Fairchild, I think. So I'll drive that input. Okay, let's bypass that. Yeah, so that's got a nice controlling kind of thing about it. It's actually tucking in some of the things that are sticking out a little bit, if that's what you want to do, and makes the track sound more coherent, but at the same time it doesn't necessarily sound squashed or fatiguing. Just go to these end choruses. That's actually working relatively hard. Bypass again. Yeah, it adds a nice thickness to it. If we want to make it more audible, we can bring this constant back to 1. And that's going to be very fast now, a very fast attack and a very fast release. So possibly too fast for a mastering application, but let's have a listen. Right, so that's pumping it, you can hear. Sort of throws the track back at you on every bounce. So you can try 2. Now I think 5 sounds better as well, because 5's a more adaptive release time as opposed to, I think it's 1 to 4, which are fixed release times of varying speeds. 5's a more program dependent release time, which is tracking the actual frequencies in the recording. So for something like this, it appears to be more natural. Yeah, you don't have that sense of the track fighting against you. So again, as to which one to use, that's up to you. I can switch between these two now, but of course the Opto one's a lot more complicated. It hasn't necessarily been set optimally, but we can still switch between and see if we can pick some sort of textural differences. Yeah, there are certainly subtle differences between them, and really in the ideal world you might use both in various combinations or use both quite lightly and get the benefits of the two. You might get that nice sort of warming effect that you get from the 670 here, and the bounce and control that the Opto gives you as well can be added in. So have fun with those, and we will be discussing more on dynamics in upcoming movies. In this tutorial we're going to discuss dithering. Dithering is a small but very important part of the mastering process. But it also seems to be something that has a great deal of mystique around it, and it's really not that complicated. Dithering is the process you use any time you reduce the word length of a digital signal. And what dither does is injects random low-level noise into the signal, which masks the ugliness of the loss of bits. Normally you would think of noise as a bad thing, but in this case this sort of noise is much better than the sound of bits being truncated off and the quantization noise that results from that horrible kind of bubbly stepping sound that you hear down low. Dithering can virtually eliminate that by putting a smooth level of very low level noise in there instead. Without the use of dither, those bottom bits just get lopped off brutally, and this can cause audible low level distortion in soft passages or on reverb tails and things like that very low in the detail. So you must always dither the signal when you're going from your 24-bit or 32-bit system to your final output for CD, which of course we know is 16-bit. Something else we need to mention here, please do not confuse this with sample rate. Sample rate and sample rate conversion have nothing to do with the bit depth of the file. They're two independent things. Now, some workstations have plugins which operate at double resolution, that is 48-bit resolution in a 24-bit fixed environment, or some of them are 64-bit resolution in a 32-bit float environment, and then they internally dither themselves back to 24 or 32. And look, seriously, don't worry about fixed versus float or any of those things. It's way too complicated for all this, and don't really worry about these plugins either. Most of that is taken care of internally. But do be mindful of making sure that you dither your final output to 16-bit if CD is your chosen destination. Now in TRACS, let's have a look at where the dithering option is. If we go into the File menu, which is just outside your viewable area here, but trust me, that's the File menu. We go to Project Properties. And here we can see that dithering is currently turned off. So in this case, I'll want it on because we're going to be outputting to CD at the end of this project. And I want to output a 16-bit file. Now, another area of confusion for a lot of people is, in this case, I've dragged in 24-bit pre-masters. So you think, yes, they're 24-bit. I need to convert them to 16-bit, so I need to use dither. But if you're mastering 16-bit tracks, some people think, well, they're 16-bit tracks. I don't need to dither them down because they're already 16-bit. Now, what this argument fails to understand is that the processing in your workstation, be it TRACS here or any other one, is generally never at that 16-bit resolution. The audio is being handled in a 24 or 32 or even greater bit world. So in spite of the fact that you've dragged in a 16-bit file, as soon as you start adding manipulations to it via EQs, compressors and all the other tools we've got, it's no longer a 16-bit file. It's been upped to a higher bit depth and processed at that level. So you still need to add dither at the end of the exercise because it's no longer a 16-bit file. You're dithering down a larger bit depth. So don't forget that, keep your dithering on and you should be cool. The times you want to turn this dithering off is when you're not outputting to a CD. Maybe you're passing it through TRACS and you want to hand that off back to a workstation. In that case, keep it at 24-bit or 32-bit or whatever you're operating at, and then hand the file off. But if this is the end of the line and we're going out to CD, definitely make sure your dithering is on. In this tutorial, we're going to have a look at MS processing. In the past, this was considered by some to be a secret weapon of the high-end mastering engineer. But like everything, this wonderful technique has filtered down to us masses, and now we can exploit the power of being able to separate certain components in our mix. MS stands for mid-side, though sometimes it's referred to as mono-stereo. I think this second term is actually incorrect, but it's one of those things where popular use has allowed it to creep into the audio dictionary. The MS technique allows us to separate the stuff up the middle of our mix from the stuff on the sides of our mix. Assuming a traditional pop mix style where kick, snare, bass and lead vocals among others are right down the middle, this means we can make changes that will affect only those elements. So now we can turn up or down a lead vocal in a mix. Now, as I said at the beginning of everything, every change in mastering has a consequence. So sure, we can turn the lead vocal up a little, but this may also bring the snare up a little because it's also up the middle and shares a lot of the same frequencies. Another consequence is we may inadvertently narrow the width of the mix because we're boosting parts of the middle and leaving the sides alone. Other cool things we can do with this technique is make a mix feel wider by doing things only to the side channels. Imagine a mix with a hard, bright vocal or aggressive middle guitar sound, but we want to make the rest of the mix feel brighter, but we can't afford to crank the highs on the vocal or the guitar. Using the MS approach, we can give the mix a sense of being brighter by EQing the sides bright, but leaving the middle alone, so the vocal tone remains or the guitar tone remains as is, but the whole mix will feel brighter and more immersive. What else? Well, because reverbs are generally stereo, how's about being able to tailor the EQ of the sides to, say, roll off the bottom end in the ambience, or maybe hype the bottom end of the ambience without it interfering with the kick and the bass? Something that's been prevalent in mixes I've been sent to master is very loud, wide-panned rock guitars, like when a crunchy rock part has been doubled and they've thrown one on the left and one on the right. Standard, cool trick, but sometimes depending on their monitoring situation, they've got these guitars overwhelming the vocal, which is right up the middle. It's very cool and powerful for the mastering guy to be able to actually help out with mix-type things like this, which might normally require a proper remix. Just a quick warning now on some of the things that bad MS mastering can do. If you're new to it, you might overdo the stereo widening effect. It can initially be really pleasing to excite the sides as much as you can and make the mix super wide, but be careful not to dig a hole in the centre. Remember that normally the main interest in the mix is coming from the centre, usually the vocal or main solo instrument, main drums and so on. Now my personal take on MS in mastering is that it's a fix-it tool. I don't use it from the outset as a standard tool, only when some problem presents that could benefit from it. I'm sure there's others out there who have an MS matrix in their template from the get-go. That's cool too. The standard whatever works approach is best here. Now let's have a practical look at MS in TRACS. TRACS now has 5 processors that take advantage of MS processing. You can see it over here in this linear phase EQ. So we can run our mix as left-right, or we can run our mix as MS. And here, when we're in left-right mode, we can either EQ left or right, or do them together. And same with MS. As soon as I click this, the L and the R will change to M and S, and I can choose the mid or the sides, or run the EQ right down the middle, so no changes made differentiating the two. So this little LR-MS switch box appears in the linear phase EQ, also appears in the EQ1P vintage equalizer, also appears in the standard original TRACS equalizer, as well as the new opto compressor, and a version of it in this Fairchild emulation, which is the lat-vert control here, which effectively does the same thing. And this is a copy of the original design back in the 50s when this compressor was first conceived. So for this initial demonstration, let's have a look at the linear phase EQ. I've got all the others bypassed. Now here's the bit of music we'll work with.
In another time, another space, every road I ever walked along, every river that I crossed.
Okay, so let's just examine what control we have got here. So I'll switch this to M. And now what's cool about TRACS here is if I just leave it on LR for a second, have a look at the metering here. So the metering on this plugin is showing me left and right, as you would expect. When I switch over to MS, it's now turned into an MS meter, where the left one is showing the middle and the right is showing the sides.
Every road I ever walked along, every river that I crossed.
At the moment, that's showing a pretty healthy phase relationship, where the left is much more dominant than the right, or the middle is much more dominant than the sides. But let's see what happens when we play with the output of this, of just the M side.
In another time, another
Let's turn off the compare. Right.
every road I ever walked along.
Now the S part of this meter is competing much more healthy than it was before. And you can hear the mix kind of sounds all very out of phasey, because all we're hearing is the stereo component of the mix. And vice versa, I can overdo the mono component and overpower the stereo component. Overloading that a bit, that's okay. So armed with the knowledge of being able to split them like this, let's go, I'll put that back to 0. Let's just play with the stereo side of the mix, or sorry, the sides part of the mix, making my own mistake here. And I'll brighten up the sides, but leave the middle alone.
In another time, another space.
In fact, why don't we go to the mid, turn it right back and level. So we'll just hear that now. So now we can hear the effect that's having. So just for the sake of an exaggeration, let's push it a bit too hard. Okay, that's a bit too much. Now we'll go back to the mono side, or mid side, and put that back at 0.
Drawing nearer to the shore I see.
Now let's bypass that and hear the difference.
I just can't believe. Waiting there is someone just like me.
Not only does it sound wider, but it actually sounds brighter and more vibrant. But the lead vocal hasn't been touched. The lead vocal up the middle, that is. So as I switch in and out, listen to the vocal.
Every time I ever felt alone.
So let's try the same thing to the bottom end. I'll pull this, again, the mid side back. Switch to the sides, and let's now equalize that. Let's play it.
In another time, another space. Every road I ever walked along, every river that I cross, every time I ever felt alone.
So we can really warm up the bottom. Of course, you can hear the damage we could do if we're not careful. And also take note of this little graph here, the phase graph, which of course is now showing that things are all wacky. Ooh, that's a bit crazy. Pull that back a bit. Now when I put the mids back in, you'll see this go more vertical.
There is someone just like me in another.
Now what I've ended up doing here is actually dropping the level 2.6 on the sides. I'll just put it back to Unity, but it's overdoing it a little bit. Yeah, moving all over the place. Just give a little bit of that back. Now let's bypass and check the before and after. Yeah, I've kind of unsettled the bottom end of the mix a fair bit doing that. A bit crazy. It's much cleaner the way it was, of course. But we're here to make trouble, that's our job.
Drawing nearer to the shore, I see something I just can't believe. Waiting there is someone just like me in another time.
Okay, well you get the idea of the sort of width and crazy things we can do.
Every road I ever walked along,
So even that, done a real sort of smiley face curve on the sides track.
every time I ever felt alone.
Yeah, especially with the reverbs and ambiences in general, it sort of excites them, stirs things up. And in headphones, as I'm listening to this, it makes it much more exciting doing that. I mean, we are dealing, of course, in small increments all the time in mastering, because that's what mastering is. It's only a very small touch at the end of the process, but you can make a significant difference, as we all know. Let's now have a look at how we can affect the volume of the lead vocal on its own and the side effects that occur when we mess with that. So we'll just reset all this. In fact, put that back in the middle. Reset all these. And hopefully we're back at an equal place now. So now just switching to the mid.
In another time, another space.
I could push up 3 or 4K where the main presence of the vocal is. It's very broad. So you can hear how I'm hitting the vocal bang on there. Let's just go back to the vocal section with my little loop.
In another time, another space. Every road I ever walked along, every river
Now just bypass
that I
that.
crossed, every time I ever felt.
Yeah, see, I'm hearing a narrowing of the mix as well now because our attention's getting drawn towards that vocal. That middle of the mix is now, of course, louder simply by virtue of the fact that I'm pushing that frequency up. And so the things on the sides are getting more obscured and effectively we're narrowing the mix. But if this was a mix where the vocal was too soft and we were having problems with that, this could be just the ticket. I mean, the narrowing of the mix is a small price to pay, to getting your vocal level right. So definitely worth it in that argument. Okay, let's have a quick look at the MS functions inside one of the Dynamics processors. So I'll bypass that and let's go to the opto compressor and see what sort of damage we can actually do by processing mid and sides independently inside a compressor. So for the sake of comparison, we'll be quite aggressive here just to hear what we can do. So we'll go for the MS and let's compress the sides really hard. So we'll leave the middle alone for now. In fact, let's just make sure the middle's doing nothing by turning the compression down there and ratio down. That should pretty much leave it alone. We'll just check.
Every road I ever walked along,
Right, that bottom meter's showing us the sides, top one's doing nothing.
every time
Now we'll hit the sides hard.
felt alone. In another time, another space.
Go say 4 to 1.
Every road I ever walked along, every river that I crossed.
Now you can hear that squishing up on the sides. We're going deliberately too heavy, as I said.
Another time, another
Those backing vocals are smashing now. I'll pull it back and level in the output. Okay, now we'll just compare that. Ooh, thin, doesn't it? Thins right out.
Every road I ever walked along, every river that I crossed,
Can you hear the width? Can you hear the pumping on the sides? So I'll mess with the release control on that.
every river that I crossed, every time I ever felt alone.
Now to exaggerate this, let's pull the middle down. Yeah, probably should have done that to start with. Let's see what we can do just to these sides. So a fast release. It's actually distorting a bit now because of that. Let's drive it even harder. And we'll pull the level back a little bit on the output even more. So, say -5. Okay, let's bring the middle back up again.
Every time I ever felt
Bypass.
alone, every road I ever walked along,
Yeah, it's definitely excited the sides.
that I crossed, every time I ever felt alone.
But at the same time, it hasn't overcompressed the vocal or the most important elements up the middle of the mix. So, not a bad approach. If we reverse this, I'll go back here and put all these things back to their default state. Now we'll go to the middle. In fact, quickly, I'll just turn the ratio to 1 for the sides. We'll go to the middle and we'll hit that hard. And my assumption here is that the bad things occurring will happen much quicker with the middle.
Every road I ever walked along, every river that
All right,
I
bypassed.
crossed,
Oop, wake up.
every time I ever felt alone, every road I ever walked along, every
Sides is nothing.
river that I crossed, every time I ever felt alone, every road I ever walked along, every river that I crossed.
Actually, it's not as bad as I expected it would be. Getting some excitement and movement in it. Obviously, if we go much further, we'll be in trouble. Let's bypass. Starts to make it sound smaller.
Every time I ever felt alone, every road I ever walked along, every river that I...
Yeah, it's actually a very good compressor, this Opto compressor. I mean, it's quite forgiving in this respect. A lot of other compressors would have really destroyed that audio by then, especially with these sort of time constants, but it's hanging in there and not sounding as bad as it probably should considering how badly I'm treating it. But of those last examples, I was more impressed with compressing the sides and leaving the mid alone, which gave the mix a lot of energy and power, and at the same time didn't really have any side effects at all on the vocal and the rhythmic elements of the mix. So that's MS mastering. There's a million ways you can manipulate this, as I'm sure you can conceive. So dive in with T-RACS and have fun because there are so many options available to you. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about multiband dynamic control. Multiband limiters and compressors are sort of a hybrid of the EQ and the compressor. Some people call them dynamic EQs, which is also a valid description of what they do. The idea here is that you've got a single device that breaks the audio spectrum down into more than one frequency band and then allows you control over those individual bands. T-RACS has a multiband limiter, which you can see here, and this splits the audio spectrum into 3 bands. You have individual threshold control for each band, which are these ones here, low, middle and high. You have individual gain makeup controls for each band, which is these ones, low, middle and high. And then the 2 overlapping areas have adjustable crossover controls. So this one between the low and the mid, and this one adjusting the crossover between the mid and the high. An often asked question about multiband dynamic processors is why you would use one over a normal EQ. And the simple answer is that they excel in only coming into use when you need them. So imagine a song where the chorus has a really aggressive high mid feel, maybe some hard guitars come in and they're a bit too bright. You could focus the multiband limiter on just that frequency region and then set the threshold so it only just kicks in when the chorus hits. That way you're not punishing the rest of the song for the mistakes of the chorus. And at the same time you're kind of automating and evening out the spectral balance of the whole song, if that's indeed a good thing. So it depends what our hypothetical song needs. Now, remembering back to our original tutorial on dynamics, I talked about the two definitions of what a limiter is. Well, this one's sort of both. It could act as a final Brickwall style limiter because it does have a true zero attack. If you set the overload control on this counterclockwise, you'll get a proper solid digital stopper for your tracks. Now, prior to T-RackS 3 Deluxe, this might have been a good idea, but because the new Brickwall limiter in T-RackS 3 Deluxe is so good, I prefer to use the multiband limiter here as a gentle creative tool to even things out and stick that somewhere before the final single band Brickwall limiter. So let's have a little play with it and see what sort of sounds we can get. That's on. That's off. Just a tiny bit louder off. That's okay, tonally we're exactly in the same place. So the first useful thing we'll try and do is isolate some high mid frequencies, presuming they might have been too hot, which they're probably not in this track, but let's assume they were. I'll show you how we can isolate some high mid frequencies and then treat them. So what I'd probably want to do is first of all attempt to find them with the middle band here. So let's drop the level of the high band, let's drop the level of the low band, and there are 15 dB drop on each. Even just to make it point out more, I'll push this middle band higher, and let's hear what that sounds like. Okay, so there's our band. Now it's all sort of middle at the moment and not high mid, so we'll try and focus it. Get the thresholds out of the way for now. Okay. Now I'm not really getting enough of the squawk from a high mid that I would expect, so let's pull this middle band back and try and deal with it with just the top band. Okay, so it's lower than that. Okay, there. So let's say there was too much bite coming through that area. Okay, now with these thresholds out of the way of all the bands, I can grab the band in question and pull that one down a bit lower. Wait till I get some gain reduction. There we go. Now for the sake of exaggeration, that's too much, but let's have a listen. Now that's sounding pretty ugly. Because we're dealing with high frequencies, we can probably afford to have the release a lot quicker. And that should clean this up. Now with that fast release, it's a lot better than back here. Yeah, where it's really just lazy, you can hear it. It's a fair bit more sprightly. Okay. Now if that was the end of what we wanted to do, let's just reset these levels back to 0 each. Now we're dulling a bit at the top now because of that, so we'll make up some gain on that top one that we've just compressed. Now let's compare. Okay, that's without. And that's in. Now we can tuck in that kick that's sticking out a little bit, but we'll want to cross this over much lower. So this is the crossover between the low and the mid, and we're just dealing with the low. So maybe 150 or so. Let's have a listen to that. Now, of course, this fast release time also comes into play for that one. So we do have to be careful if we're going to mix the bands like this. We'll bring this back, start our loop again. Okay, bypass that. And suddenly the old one sounds quite flat by comparison, doesn't it? So we have to be careful that we're not fooling our ears by over-hyping the whole track and thinking it's great. This is probably one of those times when comparing the mix to a known good source or a known target source is a really good thing, and we'll be dealing with that in a couple of movies' time, but we'll keep going on this for now. So that's one trick there. Let's say now we just want to focus on the bottom end alone. So we'll reset everything, hit this reset button. We're back to square one. We'll just focus our attentions on the very low end. So same routine, we'll pull the mids right back, we'll pull the highs right back, push the bottom up a little bit. Have to be careful with that it doesn't thump through. Now let's have a listen. And we can tune it here with this. Now these crossovers are obviously quite shallow, which you can usually tell by how much stuff is getting through. Okay. And let's bring that down a bit. Now in a way we can use this to make a huge bottom end, even as though I'm compressing the bottom at the moment. Depends on how much we make up after the fact. So we could compress it quite hard, but then make up quite a lot, and then we'll get this quite big but controlled bass. Okay. Now we are working on that kick, you can see there on the reduction meter. Let's bring the others back in. And now we can make up more kick than the others. Okay, compare. Okay, we'll need to turn up the dry one for comparison's sake. Okay, that's new. Original. Okay, we can probably put a bit more through here. That's new. That's the original. Yeah, I'm hearing a bit more thump on the new one, which I should, considering I'm pushing 6.4 dB on that band there. And I'm only reducing maybe up to 3 or 2. If you want to get a bigger effect, we'll push the drive harder. Now I'm pushing more into that threshold so I can back it off. That's our loop there. Oops, sorry.
I just never see it the first time.
Okay, now you can hear that I've overdone it on that kick.
I'm moving too close for protection.
Now back to the original. So I have certainly hyped the whole thing up a little bit now.
Whenever you're near me at head speed, as you come closer to me.
And again, as that new one still sounds so much better and the old one seems to be dull, you know, you might have a bit of a problem. You need to do some comparison work because your ear can get fooled. And possibly mine is being fooled right now with these headphones on, which obviously I wouldn't normally master with headphones on. But that does give you a picture of the kind of power you can have with these sorts of tools. Now, one more thing. I hate focusing on loudness as a main issue because it is one of the detriments of this business. But as I keep saying, it is a known evil that we have to deal with. These sorts of tools can be used to generate quite good loudness as well. This overload control gives you this kind of continuous sweep between pure limiting and a kind of clipping smoothing, which can be really nasty if it's up high, but when you smash it hard, it can give you a nice crunchy sound as well. So it's this fine line between pure limiting here, which doesn't take as much of a beating as this kind of aggressive clipping approach you can get from overloading it this way. So let's just have a little play and see how loud we can get this before really destroying it. And I've got to be careful that I don't just destroy it because that doesn't prove anything. So let's have a look. Reset again. And just leaving everything set dead flat to the defaults, I'll start pouring in some input. And in fact, just to show what this overload does, let's hit it even harder. Now if I pull the overload counterclockwise to make it a true transparent limiter, I'm getting much more limiting. And of course that sounds appalling. So if we were going to do it with pure limiting like that, I mean, it sounds kind of like rubbish anything beyond that. I think we're still okay there. But we're not using this as our final limiter anyway in our hypothetical situation. I've got a brick wall there which is not being touched. It's well below, so that's fine. So we'll come back here. I'll hit this hard again, which sounds awful. And I'll push this overload and listen to what happens. It's getting louder, and yet the gain reduction is getting less, which seems to contradict itself, but it's because it's getting denser as well and kind of starting to internally clip a bit. But that's the nice clip, not the bad clip, or the nicer clip, not the really horrible crunchy clip. Now taken to the nth degree, if I push this really hard, all the way, it just makes it dense. See? Now here's the irony. Look at this here. I'm not hitting zero there. Look at this perceived loudness down here. Now I'll bypass and go back to the original. And if I try and match the volume just with compare makeup here, I mean, I'm smashing into the red here, I'm destroying it. So that's totally unacceptable from a delivery point of view. And yet look how far back we are on the loudness meter here. Now I'll go back to our processing. Okay, hang on, we've got to a soft bit of the song. Push this up even more. So we're actually getting into the rock pop green area here. Compare. Right, now this one is considerably softer and yet it's smashing through the red because it's much more dynamic, but it's not loud, it's dynamic. There's a new one, much louder and much perceived louder too. Older. New one. Okay, older. So back to the beginning there. Yeah, much louder. And I don't think I've completely ruined that yet. I mean, the guitars do tend to sound very full. But you have to use care with these things, which maybe I'm not using enough of right now. But to make the point, the loudness that you achieve should be done with a number of tools before a final limiter. And this is one of those. And of course, we've got the classic clipper, plus maybe some parallel compression and whatever tools you need to get the job done. So I hope you got something out of this tutorial. Thanks. Now we're going to have a look at parallel processing. Parallel processing involves sending the same signal down two separate processing paths at the same time and then combining the results of the two. This technique is used all the time in mixing to, for example, make drums pop and yet be powerful at the same time, or maybe on vocals to make them thick and aggressive yet still maintain sort of a dynamic movement. The approach involves thinking out what a track needs and then applying the two processes that will combine to make that work. In mastering, it's the same approach. You want the track to have power and smoothness, but you also want to retain some of the natural dynamic. This usually involves treating one of the processes much more aggressively than you ever would normally if you were just doing a single process. Then you blend that process back under the drier one, for want of a better term. T-RACS has this unique approach to its modules that you can see here when we click on the Show Chain button. The first four, as you can see here, have the option to be parallel. And then the signal flow goes into serial modules after that. So we've got 4 parallel ones here, so that's 8 in total, and then an additional 4 in serial after that. This allows us to do our creative stuff up front and then tidy up at the end here. So let's have a look at this in actual work. I've got a Fairchild emulation here in number 2. So why don't I put in 2A an opto compressor. So now if we look at the chain, in slot 2, I mean it could have been slot 1, 2, 3 or 4, it doesn't matter, I've chosen 2. In slot 2 I've got an opto and a Fairchild in parallel. So for the sake of this example, let's turn this one here to bypass. So the opto is now not doing anything, it's just sitting there. And we'll go to the Fairchild. We'll use the opto as our aggressive one, and we'll use the Fairchild as our sort of smoothing, nice one. Now at the moment, I think it's set to quite a nice preset. Let's just have a check. Right, it's just kissing the top of that. Only on one side by the look of it. Not even there. Or better still, let's even try one of the presets. No, it's in lat vert mode, I can see here. Let's go to one of the presets. So we're in module mode here. Click up here, T-RACS Deluxe, Model 670. Now let's go to, let's say smooth. That sounds like a good thing to have. Now I don't know how aggressive this is going to be. Let's check. Okay, it's just touching it. Not doing much damage at all. In fact, it's probably quite nice. If I bypass, yeah, it's a gentle fullness. It's probably adding a bit of gain, which might be fooling us. I'll pull that back a fair bit. Still a little bit louder. Yeah, it is certainly warming the bottom end a tiny bit. Okay. At its loudest bits there, we're almost getting 2 dB of reduction. Almost 2, but it's very gentle and slow. Time constant's 4, so it's really got a slow attack and release. Okay, given that, let's bypass that one. Let's switch over to the opto. And let's do something quite aggressive with this. We'll go to T-RACS Deluxe, opto. Okay, we'll just choose one that says lots, just to be mischievous. Okay. Now I'll pull back the output a little bit. But that is certainly working hard. Look, at its loudest bits, it's over 5 dB, which is pretty much way too much normally if this was a single-ended process. But because it's going to be parallel, it could be just what we want. Okay, I'll leave that going. And I'll bring the Fairchild in as well. Now we've got the 2 of them going. I've got a brick wall limiter at the end, but hopefully we're nowhere near the front of that, which is fine, because we just want to hear the effect of these 2 compressors without anything else down the line. So back here. Now let's bypass the whole thing and see how we compare to the original. Okay, well in actual fact, let's pump it up a bit. Okay, there's the original. Okay, I think we can afford to hit the opto even harder. Or in terms of maybe just have its output contribution louder. I'll turn the brick wall down a bit now. Okay, let's hear that. Original. New one. New one's a little bit louder still. original. Right, now what we're working on now is a bit softer, so the extra density actually doesn't sound as good on it. Oh yeah, well, relatively equal. So once you equalise the volumes on the two, you can see that of course the original is more dynamic. I mean, it is more dynamic. Our job here is unfortunately to take some of those dynamics away and tame them in the least offensive way possible. So understanding that the original is more dynamic, have we improved or damaged the master by what we're doing? And that's the question we have to keep asking ourselves all the time. So let's go back to this Opto and make it actually really earn its money, just for exaggeration's sake. I might drop this ratio a bit, but then make it work a fair bit harder the other way. Or I'll do that with the compression knob.
I just never see it the first time. Changes come slowly to me.
I'll just bypass Fairchild for a sec. So we're just hearing the Opto now. It's a very good compressor, this. It does not fall apart easily.
Whenever you're near me, I can't speak. As you come closer to me,
It's a fair bit of compression going on there. And it doesn't really have bad artifacts going on. It's certainly making it denser, but that's its job. What if we really speed up that release and make the poor thing really suffer?
I give to you my heart. You live within my soul.
Okay, put the Fairchild back in. Now global compare. Yeah, now we've certainly densified that mix a lot. Now while it doesn't seem like much now, what we are really doing is preconditioning this for that final limiting stage, or perhaps a clipping stage prior to that limiting stage. So now, unfortunately, we are in the business of making things unnecessarily loud. So now that we've actually conditioned that in advance, we can choose one of these modes here, maybe, let's say Advanced 2 or 3, which adds a nice layer of gentle distortion, which allows this thing to get as loud as it can get. Turn the ceiling down a touch, and I'll just start pushing. We haven't even got to the top yet. Okay, there we go.
I just never see it the first time. Changes come slowly to me. I'm moving too close for protection.
And there's the original, which of course is much more dynamic and bouncy. Back to the Opto. Pull that back a bit, and I'll use the Fairchild to pump harder.
Whenever you're near me, I can't speak. As you come closer to me,
That's better.
I lose all my sense of perspective. Heart and soul.
Back to the limiter.
I give my all for you.
There we go. Now in this perceived loudness meter, we're getting into that green. Whoa! Right up to the scary place. And at the same time, we're not limiting the hell out of it. Look, we're only getting -1, 2 dB of gain reduction at the most. Maybe little flashes to 3, but it's very fast. So, of course, we are being detrimental to the audio because unfortunately that's the mastering man's lot these days if they're going to work in a competitive commercial environment. But we are getting things louder and we're conditioning it along the way. So we're not just smashing it into a limiter at the end, which of course won't get the job done anyway, as we showed in the earlier videos. So that's a little taste of parallel processing, and I hope you got something out of that. Okay, so hot on the heels after the parallel processing tutorial, we're now going to look at using compressors serially, that is, one after the other. Now keep in mind the parallel processing in T-Rax doesn't have to be used on compressors, though there's little creative benefit in having parallel EQs, so traditionally parallel processing does focus on the use of dynamics processors. So now, why have two compressors in series as opposed to having one single one just working harder? Well, there's a few answers to this. Firstly, there's a body of thought that says that compressors sound better when they're not working too hard, so two compressors doing a couple of dB of gain reduction each will behave better than one having to do 4 dB or more. There's also the concept of counterbalancing the time constants, so the first compressor might have a low threshold to make it work harder, but a middling to long attack so many transients get through. Then the second compressor might have a fast attack, but a very low ratio and high threshold, so it only just comes into play on those bits that are still problematic after the first compressor. Then there's another body of thought that says that maybe the first compressor should have a high threshold, but a fairly high ratio, and affect maybe only 20% of the program, allowing the rest of the 80% to pass through, but have been conditioned ahead of time. So there's loads of ways you could set up your 2 or more compressors, and of course, this depends on the tracks and what you're trying to achieve with them. Also, keep in mind here that one compressor working at 2 to 1 followed by another compressor working at 2 to 1, for example, does not give us an output that is the equivalent of 4 to 1. It's actually much higher than that. So really just use your ears and hopefully you'll know when you've overdone things. So let's experiment a little here and see what combinations we can uncover. I've chosen the most dynamic song on the album for this purpose, so you can see here it's quite peaky on the waveform. Let's have a listen to it totally dry. In fact, we'll get rid of everything. They're bypassed anyway, but that brick wall there is bypassed, so it's not going to play. And you can see on the meters here it's quite pokey. Let's experiment a little here and see what combinations we can uncover. So I'm going to put in 2 opto compressors, and I'm choosing that one because it's got a lot of control. There's no point putting in a Fairchild 670 if we're going to just mess around with attack and release here. Okay, now I'll bypass the second one. So it's now bypassed there already, sorry. Wake up the first one, bring it in. And with this first one, we're going to have a relaxed attack. So as far out as say 20 milliseconds. So some of the transients will get through. We'll stick with a 2 to 1 ratio for the 2 of them for our example. Now let's see what sort of reduction we can get out of this. I'll set that up so it's actually fairly compressed, and then I'll deal with the input to control it all. Now we'll go for about 2 dB of reduction. Now we're getting very loud here already, so I'll just pull it back at the output. So the compressor can do its thing, and we'll set a comfortable output here. Keep those peaks to -3 or so. Okay, so we're getting 2 dB of reduction, but a fairly slow attack. Let's just have a quick listen to the release. Now I've chosen this song actually because it's the most dynamic track on the album. You can see on the waveform here it's got a lot of spikes in it. So it's the most dynamic track and probably the best suited to have a double compression technique on this album. And even now we're getting a lot of fader movement we can see here. But there's 2 dB of reduction. I can even go a little bit harder. See what this release is doing. That's too slow for me. Okay, so it's quite snappy. It's actually a slow attack, fast release. Now let's go on to the next compressor. And this one's going to be a fast attack, Maybe we'll just leave it at 1 millisecond. We're sticking to the 2 to 1 as we said. I'll push up the amount of compression there, and then we'll just control the whole thing from the input here. So wake it up. Okay. We'll get 2 dB from this side as well. I'm hearing that sort of release hangover sound from the kick drum. Okay, so we've got now 2 compressors working in series, both doing about 2 dB of reduction at most. There's the first one. And there's the second one. Now let's turn on this brick wall limiter at the end of the line just to get us up to reference level. We're not going to actually start limiting with it. We'll just use it as a gain makeup. So I'll turn that on. Now our peaks are getting up there. Just trying to see even the slightest bit of gain reduction from this processor. There it is there, okay. We're just getting a tiny bit of gain reduction. Now let's compare that to the original. Okay, much softer. We'll turn up the original. And of course we've turned it up now right into the danger zone. So there we are at a fairly equal level now. That's our new one. There's the old one, still a bit softer. Here's our new one. Now I'll just switch in and out a few times. Okay, well, as usual, we've densified it. We've made it feel denser and thicker, and at the same time we've controlled its peaks and tamed it. The other one, again, is more dynamic naturally. The original is vastly more dynamic, but is not competitive in today's environment, so needs to be pumped up, unfortunately. And also, if I sound like I'm a bit of a sad man about all this loudness thing, there are benefits to the loudness as well. It can make things certainly more present, especially when they're softer. They can sound more present at those lower levels. Or for things like in the car, they can certainly sound louder in the car at softer levels and be more heard. So all the low detail can be heard. So there are benefits to having things denser and louder. You know, the only real issue with the loudness wars is when it's damaging the sound beyond belief, as does happen. Now let's take the other approach. I'll turn off the brick wall limiter. And the other approach is almost the opposite thing. We'll bypass this second compressor. We'll go back to the first one. Turn our process sound back on. Now this time we'll take a harder, more aggressive approach up front, but it doesn't work as hard. So we'll go back to, you know, a decent, like just 1 millisecond attack, which is quite fast. And we'll go for the 2 dB of reduction by trimming the hedge up the front rather than doing it on the back. So that's now working too hard because we've shortened the attack. That's going to be too much output. I'll back that off again. Okay, now we'll have another play with the release. It's a slowy release up here. It's a bit sloppy, so this track needs to be faster, I think. Actually, to hear this better, I'm going to push it much, much harder and see what happens.
Sometimes I can't believe the very man takes my hand. No truth in what I see, and the waves that I ride take me far for the sea. I can't stay, I must know.
Now I'm destroying that, as you can see. I mean, it's never dropping below 6.5 dB of gain reduction, or 6 dB of gain reduction. Now that's a testimony to how good this opto compressor actually is, because listen to that. It's not actually destroying the sound as much as it should be for punishing it like that. That's the original. Certainly brings the bass guitar up. That's the original again. That's the processed. Okay. Maybe I'll go to a slightly higher ratio then for this first one, because that's now at 3. And we won't compress it that much, but we just about could if we wanted to. It's certainly thickening out the track. Pull back the compression amount then. Now we're getting a bit too much bounce. You can hear the distortion in there now. So slow the release down. And that's a 0 attack, so it's a bit unrelenting. Okay, now there's our 2 dB after tuning it a bit more aggressively. It's even a bit more than 2 dB, that's okay. Now we'll go to this next one. Still bypassed. Before I wake it up, I'll hit stop. Now before we wake it up, this one can now be a little gentle compressor, just sort of cleaning up what gets through and not being too aggressive at all. So let's set this to a 2:1 again, and we'll give it a nice slow attack, maybe 10 milliseconds. And a gentle release too. So this second compressor will not be too aggressive at all. It'll just give us another layer. Alright, let's compare the effect of those two to the original. Well, it's certainly tucking the snare in, I can hear that straight away. Yep, the snare now, that's the dry one, the original. Yep, and the snare pokes out a lot more there. Now here's the processed. We probably need to do a bit more work on the time constants there, because the bass guitar's kind of hanging over a little bit with release. Probably back here. Yep, it was recovering a little too fast. We want to back this off a bit now. Keep this one slow as well, the second compressor. If we bypass just that one, so maybe I'll set that one even slower. Okay, now once again I'll bring the brick wall limiter in and we'll push that a bit and see what we can get. I'll back it off a bit. I just want it to be there as a stopper. Yeah, even at 0 it's a stopper, okay. In that case, I'll turn down the output. Back to the brick wall. So that's the second limiter's output I'm just dropping. Sorry, the second compressor's output that I'm dropping. Okay, and even at 0 we're getting a tiny bit. But let's compare that to the original. There's the original. So of course, as we said, when we make up its gain here, it's T-Rex now way too loud and is distorting well over. Or he's going well into the red by 3 or 4 dB. Now here's the processed. That's the original. Processed. So you can see that we can make a track sound thicker and smoother by adding these 2 layers of compression, and at the same time loudness is easily maintained because every layer of compression allows the sense of loudness to increase, and then the limiter at the end of the chain is not having to work so hard. And of course, as you can see, there's a number of combinations you can use here, and it has to be dictated by the music, so play around and have some fun with that. Thanks a lot. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about stems. One approach that's become popular in recent years in mastering is where the client presents 2 or more stems to the mastering engineer. By stems, we mean components of the finished mix, but not the raw, untreated parts that the mixing engineer has dealt with. We mean fully mixed and affected sections, but broken up into their own files. So at the simplest level, rather than provide a finished stereo mix, a client might give you all the music without the lead vocal, and then the lead vocal separately, but as a stereo file with all the reverbs and delays that need to appear on the final mix. This way, the client and the mastering engineer together can decide on that all-important lead vocal balance against the music. It also allows the music and the vocal to take alternate paths through alternate processing. Taken to a further level, I've done jobs where clients have brought in 7 pairs of stems, breaking it right down to stereo drums, percussion, bass, guitars, keyboards, lead vocals and backing vocals. Now when this happens, the first thing to do is reassemble the components in your workstation at unity gain. Set all your faders to 0 and then listen back to the mix. You should now be hearing it as the mixer or client laid it down. This was their best guess as to how it should be, and maybe it's fine like that. If you do hear problems at this stage, then lucky for everyone, you've got the stems and off you go to sort things out. Now you don't need me to tell you the sorts of things you can do once you've got files spread out like this, the sky's the limit, but the only advice I can give is more about the headspace you're in. It can be difficult to maintain that mastering head when you're suddenly presented with some of the mixer's power. Don't forget that you're still the big picture guy and it's your responsibility not to get hung up on too much of the small stuff. You can get in deep and fast when you've got all this in front of you. And that's why you've got to keep in mind that if you're doing this professionally, working with stems probably will add to the time and cost of the job. Things are now like a mini mixing session, so take that into account. Now obviously T-Rax in its standalone mode can't deal with stems, being a single stereo mastering solution. Your options as a T-Rax user are either to use multiple full T-Rax plugins inside your workstation of choice, or if CPU usage becomes too heavy, possibly look at IK's new T-Rax singles plugins, which allow you to have a plugin of a single T-Rax module. If you just want the opto compressor, for example, fine, just insert that. These singles are free to T-Rax 3 owners who can download the plugins that match the ones in the T-Rax package that they purchased. So Deluxe owners get the lot, and standard owners get the ones that exist in that package. Though it does sound like a pretty good incentive for the standard owners to upgrade to Deluxe if you ask me, because you get all those extra plugins as standalones, plus the full T-Rax Deluxe package. Okay, I hope all this talk about stems has got you thinking, and thanks. You know, the single most frustrating thing to me working in the audio business used to be the way my ears tricked me. I hated the way you could be led by what you think you were hearing, and then later you can't believe you made the decisions you did. In my first few amateur mastering jobs, it was so easy to make things bright and alive sounding, but the trouble was my ears kept adjusting and accepting the changes in spite of them being too much. Then, when you bypass back to the original, it suddenly sounds dull and washed out in comparison. That's when the sensible voice inside your head says, hang on a minute, the original track didn't sound that bad when we started 10 minutes ago, but then the other voice on the other side of your head kicks in and says, yeah, but listen to how good you've made it sound now. You know you've crossed that important line when you stab that second guy with a fork and never listen to him again. We need to understand that our perceptions are always shifting and we have to keep realigning them with either a known good source or a target source that you or your client provides. As a mix engineer as well, I've worked with several top mastering engineers and observed how they work. I'm talking about the guys who have the full analog path which feeds back into their workstation, so ironically they can't make changes on any song as quickly as you can here in T-Rax, because once they commit a song to a hard drive, if there are any changes required, they need to recall their settings and do the whole process again. Anyway, back to the way they work. Typically they either reference the first song of the day against some other commercial or known source, or perhaps the brave or very experienced tackle that first song blind. But then every subsequent song is consequently referenced back to the ones that have come before it. So by the time they're working on song 8, for example, they're comparing it back to songs 1 to 7. This way they can easily tell if, for example, song 4 just isn't working the way it should and needs to be looked at again. T-RackS makes this whole reference track thing really easy. Considering that each track in T-RackS has its own set of processes, you simply drag your reference mixes into the list and don't apply any processes to them at all. Then you can jump around easily from one to the other regularly to make sure you're on track. So in this mocked up case that I've got in front of me, the artist, Graham Goble, who can be found at grahamgoble.com, that's GrahamGoble.com, who has kindly provided the music for this tutorial, has given me some mastered mixes from his previous album, and these are what I'll use to base the mastering of the other tracks. So what I've got set up in front of me now is 4 tracks. We'll narrow it down to that, so let's just say it's an EP. I've got 4 tracks, and then I've got 2 reference tracks, as you can see they're labelled as Ref 1 and Ref 2. And they're the 2 tracks from his previous LP, which are mastered. Now in this particular case, I'm going to work on the premise that the previous album is hypothetically perfect, which of course is not true, but what I mean is I'm not trying to better it for this example. Our goal is to match it sonically, and that's what we're going to attack in our next tutorial. Okay, so following on from the last tutorial on having our reference files for comparison, as we've said, I've narrowed the album down to 4 tracks, so let's call it an EP, plus our reference 2 tracks underneath, 1 and 2. And as I said, they're from Graham's previous album and they're fully mastered, ready to go. Now it might be interesting to point out here that the track here, Let It Rain, number 4, was actually mixed by a different engineer to the rest of the album, or rest of the EP as we're calling it here now. It was mixed in the same environment and on the same gear, but at least there's a distinguishing factor that a mastering guy may have to contend with. Now just a quick caveat, I'm going to be doing this much faster than normal, and as I've said, I'm wearing headphones, which you normally wouldn't do on a mastering job except maybe as an additional reference at some point. So this really is an abridged version with me way out of my comfort zone or natural habitat, with the microphone stuck in front of my face and all that stuff. But look, still, the principles are the same. No more excuses, let's get to it. So let's have a listen to the 4 tracks we've got and the references and see how they all hold up against each other. So you can tell it's got a slightly different texture about it. That's the odd one out, mixed by the other guy. Now here's the references. As you can see, they're of course densified there. And the other one. Now if we look at the perceived loudness meter here, not that loudness is our goal, but we are trying to match those, so a certain amount of loudness will be our goal. Let's have a look where these tracks sit in that. Okay, so that one's pretty much in the lower to middle part of the green section. And pretty much the same sort of thing. So they're relatively equal to each other, which is good. So let's start working on these and see what they need in comparison tonally before we even deal with volume. Actually, it might be better to just bring them up in volume, so at least we're dealing with them on a more one-against-one basis. So we'll start with this one, and we'll give that a push. Okay, that's nice and clean. This one's a little sort of muddy compared to that. So we'll bring out the linear phase EQ. Turn on all the bands. very slight upper mid boost there, like 0.8 of a dB at 5.4K. I'll put the classic clipper in as well. Give that a bit of a push. I'll just turn the brick wall limiter off. Okay, different sort of texture, but we'll move on just to keep it going, and we'll be coming back and forth once we've got a rough idea on each one. So just for the sake of expediency, I'll do the same approach on the second one. We'll put the linear phase EQ in here. We'll put a classic clipper at the other end. We'll push the clipper a little bit.
Every road I ever walked along, every river that I crossed.
Now I've deliberately mixed up the harder songs with the ballads and that sort of thing just to see if we can get all the textures to mesh.
I ever walked along, every river that I crossed, every time I ever felt alone.
Okay, that's breaking up.
Drawing nearer to the shore, I see something I just can't believe. Waiting there is someone. Another time, another space. Every road I ever walked along, every river that I crossed.
Okay, we are getting some bottom end distortion on this one. So what I'll do is apply the multiband limiter, or maybe I'll do it in number 6, doesn't really matter because it's going to be the same effect, but I'll put it down here, and I'm really getting interested in limiting the bottom end a little bit. So I'll let these other ones pass. I'll push their thresholds way up.
Memory
Down here.
every road I ever walked along, every river that I crossed, every time I ever felt alone.
I'll just loop that heavy drum section there.
Another time, another space. Every road I ever walked along, every river that I crossed, every time, every road I ever walked along.
Okay, that's good.
Every river that I crossed.
So with this gentle filter set to 210, everything below that's getting hit by this limiter.
Another time, another space. Every road I ever walked along, every river that I crossed, every time,
Go harder on that limiter.
Every river that I cross, every time, every road. Drawing nearer to the shore, I see.
Okay, it's still giving me trouble.
Something I just can't believe. Waiting there is someone just. Drawing nearer to the shore, I see. Something I just can't believe. Waiting there is someone just like me. Drawing nearer to the shore, I see. Something I just can't believe. Waiting there is someone just like me.
Try again.
Drawing nearer,
Okay, that's not going to work. Slow the release time of this down.
drawing near,
Turn these off.
drawing near,
Turn that off.
drawing near,
Yeah, it seems to be in the track.
drawing near,
If I'm not mistaken, it's in the track. I'll push this harder.
drawing nearer to the shore. I see something I just can't believe. Waiting there.
Right, well, the brick wall limiter on its own seems to work.
Drawing nearer to the shore, I see.
Still distorts a bit.
Something I just can't believe. Waiting there is someone just like me. Road I ever walked along, every river that I crossed, every time, every road I ever walked along, every river that I crossed, every time, every road I ever walked along, every river that I crossed, every time, every road I ever walked along, every
All right, we'll try and roll it off with
river that I
EQ
crossed,
a little bit.
every time, every road I ever walked along, every river that I crossed, every time, every road I ever walked along, every river that I crossed.
Now, how do we compare with this?
Brand new, and I'd rather be with you. Something I just can't believe. Waiting there is someone just like me.
Okay, well, we are a little bit behind the 8-ball in pure volume, but we've got something there. Let's move on. And we will be coming back, as I said. So we'll put linear phase EQ on that. And the classic clipper.
I just never see it the first time. Changes come slowly to me. I'm moving too close for protection. Heart and soul. To everything I give my all. All for you. You alone and no one else.
Okay, now this one should have a compressor. I think the other ones before this, just to get a little bit more out of them, might get the opto compressor in front of them as well. And why don't we have a look at some of the presets, just to start us off. I mean, obviously you can't master with presets, but you can get a ballpark position. So hard compression for a rock song like this would be good. So we'll go for that. Now it's put itself on 30 to 1 in this default, so that's not great, I don't think. We'll just pull it back to about 4.
see it the first time.
Now we don't need much,
Changes come slowly to
just
me.
enough to tighten things up a bit.
I'm moving too close for protection. Heart and soul, to everything I give my all. All for you. You alone and no one else. Whenever you're near me, I can't speak. As you come closer
Okay.
to me, I lose all my sense of perspective. Heart and soul, to everything I give my all for you.
Okay, so how loud is that? Okay, I'm a bit too thick in the low mids.
I give to you my heart. You live within my soul.
All right, compare that back. Now these references seem a little bit thinner than I am.
Realize I'd rather be with you, my girl. You live within my soul.
Sorry, I'll go back to a shelf.
Taking a journey with texture and pain, waiting and watching. To everything I give my all.
Okay, we'll move on to the next one then. Again, go for the EQ there.
Your sacred ground. There's no way for you to turn around. Let it rain. Dawn is breaking at last in the light shining out.
Right, that tells me I've pushed that way too hot straight away. The importance of going back to the reference, because it sounded good to me for a second, but straight away it's too much.
Let it rain.
We'll leave the clipper out of this one for now and see how it sounds.
To your sacred ground. There's no way for you to turn around.
Okay, now back to Let It Rain. It's going to need some compression as well. Let's try the 670 on this one. And we'll see what presets are offered up. Okay, we'll just go for warm 670.
Let it rain. Let the sun shine through. Let the wind blow cold. Let the ice fall down. Everything in time.
Okay, we're not really hitting it yet.
There's no way
Because it's got a very hot output. Let's just pull that back to 0 and see where we are.
Takes you to your sacred ground. There's no way for you to turn around. There's no way for you to turn around. Let it rain.
And this isn't really doing that much. It's just smoothing things, I think. It's a lot of extra gain in it, though, due to the input being turned up so hot.
Let it rain. And when you're feeling sure, give the best you have.
Okay, compare. So we're not as loud and bright. Or maybe we're as loud, but we're not as sort of bright and clean as the other ones.
Let it rain.
Might pull back this little boost that I added. Yeah, I might leave that at 0 after all.
Let it rain. And when you're feeling, see that each step along the way.
Okay, well look, each song's now in a place, so let's now bounce between things and see if one of them sticks out as being the weak link. And by the way, I keep jumping into the loudest bit of each song because that's really what we're being judged on in many ways. We can jump into the soft bits, but we can't make volume comparisons based on that. So I'm always jumping in the sort of the lightest part of the waveform that I can see.
Walked along every river that I cross. You listen. You live.
Okay, second one's too soft. Third one's got a little bit too much on the bottom end. Okay, so there's the third one. And the beauty of T-Racks as opposed to an analog mastering solution where you have to print them each time is we can jump between these tracks as much as we want, make changes as frequently as we want, and of course nothing's committed until we finally bounce it out. So we thought there was too much bottom end on this one. Now compare to, say, this one.
the boy inside. You live within.
Compared to that.
Hold on. Heart and soul.
Now we're getting loud, but that's okay.
There's no way for you to turn around.
I mean, it does kill me when you look at these meters here and they're not moving at all. They're just smashed to 0,
Let it rain.
like this. That's awful, but that's how it is on the master here, so that's what we're trying to compete with.
Along the way, along the way.
Yeah, in loud sections, it's just on all the way. And unfortunately, that's the reality of what we're living with.
Lies, I'd rather be with you.
Yeah, you can hear that it's being limited back and held back. That music really needs to breathe more, but that's the reality. So shut up and keep going.
The boy inside.
Unfortunately, that can come up a little bit.
Every river that I cross, every time, every road I ever walked along, every river that I cross, drawing nearer to the shore, I see something I just can't.
Okay.
I give. Knows it'll make a difference.
Okay, we're not too far away now, considering how rough this is going to be. There is a certain quality that these older tracks have that I'm not going to be able to match. You can just tell they've got a different sound to the mix, clearly.
Make me feel brand new, and I, boy inside, wants to run.
That's viciously loud at that point. Okay, well, we'll just turn it down a bit.
Boy inside wants to run away. The dawn is breaking at last. Every river that I cross, every time. There's no way for you. That I cross. Just wanna be.
Okay, so I think we've pretty much got them all to a place now where they're not that dissimilar. Quick final listen.
Would I ever walked along?
Yep, the first one could do with a little bit more high mid punch. Or possibly some low mid cut.
The boy inside wants to run away. There's no time to go out and play.
Now compare that.
Every river that I cross, best falling we are taken along to a place. The boy inside, the boy inside. I'd rather listen to your voice. Everyone can see.
Okay, well, we're not going to be able to match those other two, as I've said, but given more time and a better surrounding for myself, no problem, we could probably get there. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. We've had a bit of a look at how things work in T-Rax, and it just goes to show how much power there is hiding inside the box. So happy mastering, and thanks for watching.